The stars outside the Vanguard flickered like diamonds in an endless black sea, but Captain Alex Foster's gaze was fixed on the enormous display before him. A holographic map of the galaxy, with Earth at the center, flashed in brilliant blues and greens. His fingers hovered over the console, but he didn't touch it. The map was static now, the real action happening far beyond the reaches of this data field. Captain! Lieutenant Nora Dax's voice broke through the silence. We're approaching the Sivar border. The Vanguard is ready for deployment. Alex exhaled, nodding briefly. The Sivar had been a shadow hanging over humanity ever since the Confederation's first ventures into interstellar diplomacy. Their reputation for arrogance and their iron grip over countless systems were well known, but so were their disdain for any species they considered inferior. And humanity, in their eyes, was nothing but a speck. He turned to face Dax. Prepare for visual contact. No weapons unless I give the order. She raised an eyebrow. You think they'll talk first? Alex didn't answer immediately. He knew the Sivar weren't interested in negotiation, never had been. But he wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of a fight on their terms. Not yet. Humanity had learned that much the hard way. We need to show them we're not backing down, he said finally, his voice calm but firm. Hold steady. The ship's artificial intelligence, Vox, chimed in as the hull rumbled, sending a brief tremor through the command deck. Sivar flagship detected, Captain. Designating as Arc of Dominion. Estimated distance, 2,000 kilometers. Alex leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. The Arc of Dominion was massive, bigger than anything the UEC had ever built. A symbol of Sivar might. His mind raced, calculating the odds, anticipating their next move. He had always been confident, but this was different. The first real confrontation between Earth and the Sivar. If this went badly, humanity's dream of becoming a galactic power could end before it truly began. We've got their attention, Dax said, glancing over her shoulder as the holoscreen updated with the Sivar ship's movements. Open a channel, Alex ordered. Let's see what they have to say. Moments later, a cold, rasping voice came through the speakers, sending a shiver down Alex's spine. This is High Commander Zeldar of the Sivar Empire. You have trespassed in our domain, human. State your intentions. Alex stood tall, staring at the screen as if he could physically face Zeldar's looming presence. I am Captain Alex Foster of the United Earth Confederation, he said, steadying his voice. We come in peace and seek only to ensure the security of our people. We are not your enemies, Commander. Zeldar's laughter crackled through the transmission. It was low, mocking. Peace? You dare speak of peace? Your kind has no place here. The galaxy has thrived under Sivar dominion for eons. Your emergence is troubling. Troubling? Alex's jaw tightened. You think we're just going to bend to your will, like the rest of the galaxy? Zeldar's voice dropped, its coldness now laced with menace. You would be wise to remember your place, human. We do not negotiate with insects. Leave now, or we will show you the price of your defiance. Before Alex could respond, the transmission cut off, leaving a lingering silence in the command deck. Dax glanced at him, her face unreadable. She knew as well as he did that things had just gone from diplomatic to hostile in the blink of an eye. Now we wait, Alex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. They'll make their move soon. True to his prediction, moments later, the ship shuddered as the Vanguard sensors lit up with incoming data. The Sivar flagship had just deployed a battalion of smaller ships, sleek, sharp-edged vessels that resembled predatory birds in flight. They were fast, deadly, and now converging on Earth's flagship. Shields up, Alex snapped. Get ready for anything. The crew sprang into action, the atmosphere tense. Vox's voice filled the air. Incoming projectiles, Captain. Anticipated impact in T-30 seconds. Alex's mind raced. The Vanguard had only been commissioned for a few months, and this would be its first real test. The ship's AI was cutting edge, but nothing prepared them for an encounter like this. Their weapons systems, state-of-the-art laser cannons and plasma railguns, were capable, But would they be enough? Target their lead ship, Alex ordered. Focus fire. Let them know we're not backing down. On the screen, the Savar's ships came into view, their dark forms sleek against the backdrop of distant stars. The first volley of fire came from the Savar, bright streaks of energy flashing through space, aimed at the vanguard. Brace for impact, Dax yelled. The ship's hull rattled as the first shots slammed into the shields. They held, but barely. The vanguard's crew scrambled, their movements precise, the adrenaline thick in the air. Alex could feel his pulse pounding in his temples, but he maintained his focus. Return fire! All batteries, now! Alex commanded. A chorus of weapons fired from the ship, bright beams of energy searing into the darkness of space. One Savar's ship exploded in a brilliant flash, but the rest quickly retaliated, launching another wave of attacks. Shields are down to 30%, Dax reported, her voice tight. We need to make a move, Captain. Alex gritted his teeth, looking at the incoming fire. He could feel the pressure mounting. The survival of Earth's first true military vessel hung in the balance. If the Vanguard couldn't survive this, humanity's rise would come crashing down before it ever had a chance. Engage evasive maneuvers, Alex ordered. Full power to the forward plasma cannons. Take out their rear ships, now! The ship's engines roared to life as the Vanguard pulled away from the incoming fire, the crew working in unison, keeping the ship agile. Plasma shots from the forward cannons slammed into the Savar ships, causing two of them to break apart in massive fireballs. Good hits, Captain, Dax said, allowing herself a brief smile. They're retreating. But Alex didn't let his guard down. He knew this was only the beginning. They'll be back, he said quietly. This is just the first wave. Vox confirmed the retreat of the Savar forces, but Alex's gut told him that this encounter was far from over. Humanity had just made its first mark on the galaxy, but would it be enough to withstand what was coming? The mood aboard the Vanguard had shifted. No longer was the crew celebrating their first victory. The silence that hung over the command deck was heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the ship's systems. Captain Alex Foster stood at the center of it all, eyes fixed on the view of deep space beyond. The Savar had retreated for now, but everyone knew this skirmish was only a prelude to something much larger. Captain, Lieutenant Nora Dax said, breaking the stillness. She walked up beside him, her expression unreadable. We're receiving another message from the UEC. They want a status update. Alex didn't answer immediately, his gaze still locked on the starfield. The implications of that first encounter were far-reaching. The Vanguard had held its own, but the Savar were far from beaten. He had known they wouldn't accept Earth's rise quietly, but this was different. This was war. Put it through, he said, his voice flat. The holographic communications system flickered to life in front of him, and the image of Admiral Rhea Lang appeared, her sharp features illuminated by the dim light of the command deck. Her eyes were narrow, her expression stern. Captain, she said briskly. Report. The Savar retreated after our engagement, Alex began, still trying to process the events. But they won't give up. They were probing us, testing our defenses. Lang's lips tightened. I agree. You did well holding your ground, but this isn't over. The Savar won't leave us alone now. Prepare yourself for more. Alex nodded. Understood. What's our next move? Lang didn't hesitate. We've identified a key colony near the Savar's border, Sigra 7. It's strategically important. We need you to secure it, Captain. The Savar won't leave it alone for long. If we lose it, they'll gain a foothold in our space. Alex felt the weight of her words. He glanced over at Dax, who met his eyes. She didn't need to say it, this was the real test. If the Vanguard couldn't defend Sigra 7, the Savar would have a direct path to Earth. We'll be ready, Alex replied, his voice firm. We'll head to Sigra 7 immediately. Lang gave a curt nod. Good. We're counting on you, Captain. The UEC will be monitoring your progress. Make sure it's a success. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell into another heavy silence. Alex clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. He turned to Dax. "We're heading to Cygra 7, he said, his tone resolute. "Prepare the crew." The journey to Cygra 7 took 4 days, and during that time, the atmosphere aboard the Vanguard grew more tense with each passing hour. The crew was on edge, whispers of worry floating through the hallways. They had faced the Savar once, and now they were about to face them again, this time on a much larger scale. Alex sat in his quarters, going over tactical plans for the upcoming engagement. He had read every report, every piece of intelligence about the Savar's tactics. He knew what they would do: strike fast, strike hard. But that didn't make it any easier. He was a captain, but he was also a man with doubts. His thoughts were interrupted by a chime at the door. "Enter," he called. The door slid open, revealing Dax, who stepped in without waiting for an invitation. She leaned against the frame, crossing her arms. "Got a minute?" she asked. Alex motioned for her to take a seat. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Dax hesitated before speaking, her gaze fixed on the floor. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Alex. I can see it. The crew can see it. We're all feeling the pressure, but you're not in this alone. You need to trust us more." Alex ran a hand through his hair, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't have the luxury of trusting anyone, Nora. Not with what's at stake. Not when Earth's future is hanging in the balance." "I get it," she said quietly. "But if you break, what happens to the crew? We need a leader who trusts us to have his back, not just someone who carries the weight of the world alone." Alex was quiet for a moment. He knew she was right. He couldn't keep going like this. But how could he let his guard down? He had always been the one to lead, the one to make the hard decisions. He couldn't afford to fail now. "I'll try," he said at last, his voice softer than before. "But I can't promise anything." Dax nodded, a small, understanding smile crossing her face. "That's all I'm asking." Cygra 7 was a small but vital colony located on the edge of UC space. As they approached, Alex could already see the signs of Savar activity. Small reconnaissance ships patrolled the area, their sleek forms cutting through space like shadows. The colony was too exposed, too vulnerable. The Savar were making their move, and it was only a matter of time before the full-scale attack began. "Captain, we've got incoming," Dax said, her voice tight as she studied the display. Alex turned sharply. "How many?" "At least 24 ships. I'm reading a mix of Savar fighters and capital-class vessels." Alex's mind raced. This was it. If they couldn't hold this position, they'd be facing the Savar head-on in a fight they couldn't win. "Divert all power to shields," he ordered, his voice steady despite the growing pressure. "Prepare for battle. This is our stand." Vox chimed in with a calm, robotic voice. "Shields at maximum. Weapons systems online. We'll engage them as soon as they're in range," Alex said, turning to face his crew. "This is it, people. Defend Cygra 7. For Earth." Dax exchanged a glance with the weapons officer. "Ready, Captain?" The crew braced themselves as the Vanguard accelerated into the fray. The Savar's ships came into view, their black hulls cutting through the dark expanse of space like predators closing in on their prey. The first shots were fired, and the ship shuddered under the impact. "Return fire!" Alex barked. "Take them out before they get any closer." Laser beams erupted from the Vanguard's cannons, lighting up the blackness of space. The first Savar fighter exploded in a brilliant flash, but there were too many more. They kept coming, relentless. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus. "We hold here," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "We hold, or we die trying." The battle was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than ever. The full weight of the battle pressed down on Captain Alex Foster as the Vanguard twisted and turned through the chaos. Explosions rippled across space, lighting up the darkness. The Savar fighters were relentless, their sleek forms darting in and out of the battlefield with precision. Alex's pulse raced, but his mind stayed clear. He couldn't afford panic now. This was the defining moment for humanity. Captain! Lieutenant Nora Dax's voice rang through the comms, breaking the tension in the air. We've lost 2 forward turrets. Shields are at 30%. Alex glanced at the tactical display. The Vanguard was taking a pounding, but it was holding. For now. The Savar fleet had regrouped, and their capital ships were closing in on the colony below. If the Savar succeeded in capturing Cygra 7, they would solidify their grip on this part of space, and Earth's fledgling expansion would be crippled. Continue evasive maneuvers, Alex ordered, his voice steady. Fire at will. Don't let them get close. He gripped the armrest of his chair, the vibrations of the ship rattling his bones. The crew was tense, but they were focused. Alex could see it in their eyes, the same determination that had kept them fighting against all odds. Enemy dreadnought coming into range, Dax reported, her voice tense. It's massive, Captain. We need to take it out before it reaches the colony. Alex's gaze snapped to the holoscreen. The Savar dreadnought was a monstrous vessel, a hulking fortress of metal and energy. It was a behemoth, far larger than any ship the Vanguard had faced before. Its weapons were immense, capable of destroying entire cities with a single blast. If they didn't stop it, the entire colony would be reduced to rubble. Target the dreadnought, Alex said, his voice low. We need everything we've got. The weapons officer nodded, and the Vanguard's massive railguns roared to life. A series of plasma bursts erupted from the ship, streaking through space toward the Savar dreadnought. The first blast hit, sending shockwaves through the Savar vessel, but it barely seemed to faze it. The dreadnought's shields absorbed the attack, and it retaliated with a barrage of its own. Shields down to 15%, Dax called, her voice strained. We're not going to last much longer. Alex's heart clenched, but he knew they couldn't back down. Pull us in closer, he ordered. Give them everything we've got. Full power to the forward cannons. The ship lurched as the engines roared to life, pulling the Vanguard into the thick of the battle. They had to get in close. No one would survive a long-range exchange with a ship that powerful. Alex's breath quickened as the dreadnought loomed larger in the view screen, its weapons primed and ready to strike. Captain? Dax shouted. They're locking onto us with their main cannon. Brace for impact. Alex yelled, throwing himself into the crash webbing. The ship shook violently as a massive blast slammed into their shields, the force of it rattling through the entire vessel. Shields at 5%! Dax cried, her voice sharp with panic. We can't take another hit like that! Alex's mind raced. They couldn't keep dodging forever. The Savar were too powerful, their ships too advanced. But they still had one advantage, the Vanguard itself. Humanity had built this ship to be the ultimate weapon, a symbol of their strength and ingenuity. It was time to show the Savar what that meant. Prepare for a high-speed attack, Alex said, his voice cold with determination. I'm taking us straight at the dreadnought. Target their engines. Dax's eyes widened. Captain, are you insane? If we do that, we don't have a choice. Alex interrupted, his expression resolute. We take out their engines, and they're dead in the water. If we can cripple them, the rest of the fleet will scatter. There was no time to debate. The decision was made. The crew worked in unison, setting the ship's trajectory and preparing for a high-speed collision course with the Savar dreadnought. Alex could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the final gamble. 3, 2, 1, now! He shouted. With a violent lurch, the Vanguard surged forward, its engines firing at full power. The Savar dreadnought's guns opened up, but Alex was already in motion, weaving through their fire with incredible precision. The ship rocked as the energy blast slammed into their hull, but the crew held firm. Alex's fingers danced across the controls, guiding the ship straight into the heart of the enemy vessel. The moment felt like it stretched out forever. Alex's breath was shallow, the world around him a blur of flashing lights and chaos. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, with a deafening crash, the The Vanguard's railguns tore into the Savar dreadnought's engine cores. Sparks and debris erupted into space as the dreadnought's engines exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The massive ship lurched, its systems faltering. "Target engines destroyed!" Dax yelled, her voice full of disbelief. "They're losing power, Captain! They can't move!" Alex allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The gamble had worked. The dreadnought was crippled, and the rest of the Savar fleet was now vulnerable. But there was no time to celebrate. The Savar were not known for backing down easily. "Now we finish it," Alex said, his voice steady once more. "All weapons, target their remaining ships. Take them out." The crew responded with immediate efficiency, unleashing everything they had left. The Vanguard's guns fired relentlessly, streaking through space, tearing apart the remaining Savar ships one by one. The Savar had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had thought the Vanguard was just another ship, another vessel to be swatted aside. They were wrong. As the last of the Savar ships disintegrated into the void, the crew of the Vanguard remained silent for a moment, processing what had just transpired. They had done the impossible. They had held their ground against the most powerful force in the galaxy. Alex stood at the center of the command deck, his breath still coming in short bursts. He felt the weight of the battle on his shoulders, the exhaustion, the fear, the triumph. This was only the beginning. The Savar would return, of that he was certain. But now they knew who humanity was. And they would remember. The aftermath of the battle was a haunting silence. The debris of the Savar fleet drifted across the void, slowly dissipating into the vast expanse of space. The Vanguard hung motionless among the wreckage, the bridge lights flickering slightly as the ship's systems recalibrated. The crew, exhausted and battered, began to assess the damage. Captain Alex Foster stood at the center of the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze focused on the view of Cygrus 7 below. The colony was still intact, but the cost of defending it had been steep. The Savar had underestimated humanity, but it had been a close call. Too close. "Captain," Lieutenant Nora Dax's voice broke the stillness. "We've suffered critical damage to the starboard engines. We'll need at least 12 hours for repairs." Alex nodded, his eyes still fixed on the planet. "Can we hold position?" "For now," Dax replied, her tone tinged with concern. "But if we're attacked again in the next 12 hours, we'll be sitting ducks." "We'll take that risk," Alex said firmly. "The Savar won't be coming back for a while." "We made sure of that." Dax didn't argue. She knew as well as Alex that the Savar were not the type to give up easily, but they would need time to lick their wounds. Time that humanity could use to prepare for the inevitable next wave. Alex knew that this victory was just a momentary reprieve, not an end. He turned to face the rest of the crew, who were busy at their stations, working through the aftermath of the battle. The mood was somber, but there was a quiet sense of pride in the air. They had just held off the Savar's first major assault on human territory. It was something no one had expected, and yet they had done it. "Status report, Vox," Alex said. A calm, robotic voice filled the air. "All systems are functioning at 70% efficiency, Captain. Repairs are underway. The loss of the forward turrets will take the longest to restore, but auxiliary weapons are operational." Alex exhaled slowly. "Good. Make sure we're ready to go at full capacity as soon as possible." "Yes, Captain." Alex turned back to the viewport. The battle was over, but the war was far from it. His thoughts kept circling back to what the Savar's true purpose was. They had attacked a colony that, while important, wasn't a critical stronghold. It felt like they were testing humanity, probing weaknesses, gathering information. Alex knew the Savar wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every trace of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. But there was something else gnawing at him, something deeper. Why hadn't the Savar brought their full fleet to bear? Why had they pulled back after losing only a few ships? There had to be a reason, and Alex wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. A sharp chime interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, urgent transmission from Admiral Lang." Dax said, her voice tense. Put it through, Alex replied, his attention snapping back to his officer. The holographic display flickered to life, and Admiral Rhea Lang's stern face appeared. Her dark eyes locked onto Alex with a gaze that conveyed both urgency and determination. Captain Foster, Lang began, her voice clipped. I'm afraid this victory is short-lived. We've received intelligence that the Sivar are preparing for a larger offensive. They've been rallying their forces along their borders, and we believe they're gearing up for a full-scale invasion. Alex's stomach sank. He had known it was only a matter of time, but hearing it from Lang made it feel all the more real. How soon? Within the next 2 weeks at most. They're mobilizing faster than we anticipated. They've learned from their mistakes, and we can expect them to strike harder this time. We need to reinforce our position. Alex clenched his jaw, his mind racing. What's the plan? We're sending reinforcements, Lang said, her tone colder now. The vanguard is to remain in position and defend Sigras 7 until we arrive. We'll need you to hold the line, Captain. We can't afford to lose this colony. We'll hold, Alex replied without hesitation, though his mind was already calculating the risks. How many ships are we talking about? At least 5 Sivar dreadnoughts, and their full complement of support ships. This is no longer a skirmish, Captain. It's a war. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Alex's thoughts were a whirl of strategy and calculations. 5 dreadnoughts. The vanguard had taken down 1, but 5? The odds didn't look good. Not in a fair fight, anyway. We'll need to prepare, Alex said, his voice unwavering. What's the timeline for reinforcements? 3 days. We'll be there as soon as possible, but we can't risk leaving Earth's defenses weakened. The vanguard is the first line of defense. Don't let us down. Lang's image flickered and disappeared, and the bridge once again fell into an uneasy silence. 3 days, Dax murmured, her gaze distant. We can't last that long without reinforcements. We need to either get the repairs done faster or find a way to delay the Sivar. Alex turned toward her, his face hardening. We'll buy as much time as we can. I want every available fighter pilot on standby, and I want the crew ready to move the second those repairs are done. I'll get on it, Dax said, her voice filled with determination. Alex took a deep breath and surveyed the bridge. The weight of the upcoming battle was heavier than ever. He could feel the pressure building, the expectation of everyone around him. It wasn't just the fate of Sigras 7 at stake, it was Earth's future. If the Sivar succeeded in this invasion, humanity's expansion across the stars would be over before it had truly begun. As the crew moved about their tasks, Alex turned back to the view of the planet below. Sigras 7 was quiet, serene even, in the wake of the battle. But Alex knew better than to be fooled by appearances. The real fight was coming. The Sivar would return. And this time, they would bring everything they had. The crew of the vanguard would need to be ready, because if they weren't, this might be humanity's last stand. The deep hum of the vanguard's engines was a constant reminder of the hours ticking away. The bridge was lit only by the soft blue glow of the holographic displays, and the air was thick with anticipation. Repairs had been progressing at a painstakingly slow pace, and yet the Sivar's looming return was a presence that seemed to press against every surface, making the crew on edge. Alex stood at the viewport, his fingers tapping lightly against the railing as he stared out into the abyss. "How are we holding up, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice betraying no hint of the fatigue weighing on him. Nora Dax looked up from her station, her eyes shadowed by the stress of the last few days. "We've repaired the starboard engines, but we're still waiting on the forward turrets. The auxiliary guns can only do so much. We'll have to make do." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They're coming in 3 days, and that's all we have." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken thoughts, most of them grim. 3 days. It wasn't nearly enough time to fully prepare, but it was the best they had. It was time for them to play the waiting game. "Captain," Dax began hesitantly, "there's something else. We've intercepted a Sivar communication. It's encrypted, But we've managed to decode part of it. Alex's head snapped to her, the faint flicker of hope lighting his eyes. What does it say? There's a fleet gathering at the Sivar homeworld, but it's not just reinforcements. It looks like they're preparing something, a weapon. A weapon we've never encountered before. Alex's stomach tightened. A new weapon? The Sivar had been known for their advanced technology, but what could they have that humanity had never seen? What kind of weapon? Dax shook her head. We don't know. It's too early to tell. But the encryption suggests it's a large-scale offensive weapon. Something capable of planetary devastation. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. Planetary devastation? That was beyond anything they'd faced before. The Sivar had always been ruthless, but this was on a whole new level. Keep working on that encryption. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before they arrive. Understood, Dax replied, her fingers already flying over her console. As Dax returned to her task, Alex turned his attention to the rest of the crew. They were all working quietly, each man and woman lost in their own world, doing everything they could to prepare for the battle to come. The air was thick with tension, but there was no time for any of them to indulge in their fears. The war was coming, and the stakes were higher than they'd ever imagined. Alex glanced at the chrono on the wall. 2 days left. The hours blurred by in a whirl of repairs, briefings, and strategic planning. As night fell across the ship, Alex found himself alone in the command center, staring out at the dark expanse of space. The soft hum of the ship's systems was the only sound in the room. He hadn't slept in nearly 36 hours, and exhaustion was creeping in, but he couldn't bring himself to rest. Not yet. A soft chime broke the stillness. Captain, you've been requested in the war room, came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Jacob, Jace, Hall, the ship's tactical officer. Alex stood and walked briskly to the war room, where a map of the Sivar's movements was projected across the table. Hall, Dax, and the rest of the senior staff were already gathered, their faces grim. Captain, Dax said as Alex entered, we've managed to decrypt more of that message. The weapon the Sivar are assembling is called the Annihilator. From what we can gather, it's a massive energy weapon capable of tearing through planetary shields. If it's fully operational, it could destroy an entire colony in a matter of hours. The Annihilator? Alex repeated, his voice tight with disbelief. They've been hiding something like that? Yes, Hall replied, his voice cold. And it's not just a superweapon. From the looks of it, they've been experimenting with a new type of energy core, something that could amplify the destruction. It's not just planetary, Captain. It's almost like they're building something that could turn entire systems into dead zones. The gravity of the situation hit Alex like a punch to the stomach. A weapon like that could obliterate everything humanity had worked for. Cygra 7, Earth's colonies, and any hope of expansion, they would all be gone in the blink of an eye. We need to stop them from finishing it, Alex said, his voice low, filled with a steely resolve. Whatever it takes. Hall nodded. Our first priority is to stop the fleet before they can deploy the weapon. If we can break their line, we might be able to stop the Annihilator before it's ready. We can't rely on just brute force, Dax added. The Sivar know we're coming. They'll have contingencies in place. We'll need a strategy that takes their new weapon into account. Alex thought for a moment, weighing his options. They didn't have much time. We can't engage them head-on, not with the ship as damaged as it is. We'll need to draw their fire away from the colony and then strike fast, disable their weapon before it's too late. Hall's expression darkened. It won't be easy. They'll have their entire fleet backing that thing up. Then we'll give them a fight they won't forget, Alex said firmly. I'll lead the charge. We're not going to let them destroy everything we've built. Not without a fight. As the room fell into a tense silence, everyone absorbed Alex's words. The stakes had never been higher, and yet there was a quiet certainty in the captain's voice that grounded them. They might not have been prepared for the full scale of the Sivar's power, but they weren't going to back down. The crew looked to their captain, understanding the gravity of the mission. There was no going back now. In 2 days, the Savar would come. But they wouldn't come to find humanity ready to die. They would come to find humanity ready to fight.